So you all probably know Ancestry, and they've been around for almost 20 years. We're going to do something a little different at the end of this. I agreed to be a guinea pig for my bodily fluids and family history. But first, I've got some questions for you guys. One of the most interesting things about this DNA initiative that you've launched in the last few years is that it really represented a considerable shift inside the company, and almost you've described it as a startup within a technology company. And I think a lot of companies face this where they have to pivot or push into a new area, and that has tremendous sort of cultural impact inside the company. You know, the employees are suddenly questioning whether they're with the hot thing and do they have the skills and so on. So how did you manage that? And I should say, Tim is the CEO and Ken runs the DNA project. What were sort of the biggest challenges and how did you face those in that scenario?
Yeah, so look, Ancestry's been around a long time, 20 years, and about 5 years ago we entered the DNA business, or identified that it was a huge opportunity for us. And you're quite right, I mean, we had a couple different dynamics that Ken can speak about. One, certainly was a hot new venture inside a company that had been doing really one thing for many, many years. And there was also, look, there's tremendous passion inside our company for our core business. So there were also from some parts of the company, some skepticism. So we definitely structured it as a little bit of a rebel pirate ship off to the side and tried to build it, the DNA team, its own culture and way of operating. Maybe talk about how you organize.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think what we ended up having to do is sort of, get a real unique team that was interested in DNA, and we kept to ourselves and did things, really in a very quick way, and try to not distract the rest of the company from what we were doing. And
but did that mean, sorry to interrupt you,
No,
but
no.
did that mean that everyone else felt like, oh, there's this black box thing over here and I'm not a part of it, and how come they're the cool kids?
Well, here's what's funny, right? It wasn't that way, right? It was sort of, I don't want to be part of that, right? At this point, right? That may fail, and I don't want to be, part of the collateral damage if it does. And so what we've seen is a transition from we don't want to be part of it to, hey, this thing might actually work, to this is really great, to now being a significant part of the business. So we've seen, that's what you see. I think if you're successful, you start seeing a transition in the way people think about that new venture within the company.
And so as it's evolved now, do people who don't work in the DNA area interact a lot with the people who do?
Today it's, I would say, very seamlessly work together. Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And access to data is shared and all of that.
Yeah, look, it was particularly challenging because while it was a startup and very different than the core business, one of the things that makes the value prop so wonderful is the fact that the data that people can access through the DNA experience, we've integrated, right, billions of names from our tree database, and that's an integral part of the experience. We triangulate from people that have similar DNA signals and sometimes introduce people to new ancestors. So we've had to bring these businesses tightly together, and Ken is tightly integrated now with the core business.
And I think that's an important point, is that for now at least, right, you're only using DNA in the further service of identity and family tree research, and you're not using it for any medical purposes, right?
Correct. Yeah. We certainly believe that health insights could be part of our identity value proposition, but frankly, the appetite and interest in the product value prop as it's structured today has been so phenomenal that we're chasing. We're really just working very hard to, frankly, keep up with the demand and the opportunity for product innovation.
I would imagine that the addition of the DNA specialists and the scientists and so on added tremendous cost structure to your company, at least in the early days, right? How did you manage that through special financing, or what did you do?
No, look, I mean, Ancestry generates a lot of cash flow, very profitable. We started the business when we were still public, and we just told the street, we're gonna spend about $10 million. We're gonna invest about $10 million a year for a couple of years, and we think this is a big opportunity. We actually turned profitable on that business quicker than we anticipated. But It was self-funded, very conscious decision to lean in and not apologize for the investment we wanted to make, even though it was hitting our earnings. And generally the street was pretty supportive of the idea of us extending into the space.
I want to talk a little bit about the health side, and I know you're not there yet, but you alluded to this. There's two ways you could go, right? You could talk about health markers for the individual, and then there seems to me there's sort of a public health opportunity here. You've amassed how many samples now? Of 2 million or so?
Approaching 2 million.
Coming up on 2 million.
Approaching 2 million, and your competitor is 23andMe is a little bit behind that. So there's huge now database of saliva samples with DNA markers that could, I would imagine, have tremendous value, right, in identifying disease trends and other things. Talk about that a little bit.
Ken, you want to speak to her?
Yeah, look, I think health certainly is one of the things that we could use that big database for. But if you take a step back, I mean, the reality is we've never amassed this much genetic information in one database, right? So we have 70 million family trees that people have put on the site. Now we're approaching 2 million genetic samples. We're going to be starting to get other information from consumers, and I think it's this opportunity for big data, not just in self-identity, but ultimately in health as well, is going to be huge because we've never had that opportunity to analyze and mine that much data.
I think there's some people who it creeps them out a little bit, right? Cybersecurity and the protection of this data, how much do you have to invest in that on an ongoing basis in order to,
Yeah, look, so we've dealt with personal information forever, so I think we've been pretty attentive to, we have been very attentive to our users' privacy and privacy concerns. Certainly the DNA data is also very sensitive information, so we have really invested significantly in ensuring that we can maintain the trust of our users, because so much of our brand equity is built on customer trust.
And today, what is the primary, if I send my saliva sample in, give people a sense of what the result they will get back looks like?
Yeah, so what we do is you give us a saliva sample, there are some cheek cells in there, we extract the DNA, and then we test your sample for 700,000 plus genetic markers that make up your genetic code. And that gives us a unique genetic signature that only you have. We then do two things. We compare that genetic signature to populations from all over the world, and that's how we're able to tell you what we call genetic ethnicity, which will say, we think you're between 15 and 20% Irish, between 20 and 25% Eastern European, et cetera. The second thing we do is we compare your DNA sample to every other person in the database. Computationally very challenging, but very, very valuable data. So we'll be able to identify second, third, fourth cousins that now you can anonymously communicate with to identify how you're related, what was the common ancestor maybe 100 years ago. And I think the other thing I would say is, going back to this big data point, is with 2 million samples, we're going to have about 8 billion connections. We are way more related than we thought. Even we as scientists thought when we first started
Is
this.
it actually 6 degrees of separation, or is it more?
It's funny you say 6 degrees. I actually have a slide that says genetically we're about 2 degrees of separation, right? And that's because obviously the genetics allows you to go with high accuracy up to a third or fourth cousin, which you may have shared an ancestor back in the late 1700s. So anyway, that is really the beginning of a network, a graph, right, that we're going to continue to mine for identity and then ultimately health.
And just so we're clear on the privacy side, right? So you could say to me, you have these 10 third cousins, but they're just numbers or alphanumerics. I can contact them blind, and then we can decide mutually to reveal ourselves.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, look, most people don't choose to be anonymous because most people are very actively looking to connect with other people in this relatedness graph. Yeah. But you can stay anonymous. You can disconnect your tree and hide it, and you don't have to engage in some of the communications that happens between the distant cousins that we connect through the service.
And it goes without saying that this will only work if the distant cousin has also submitted samples.
Absolutely,
That's
yeah,
correct.
absolutely.
That's correct.
Yeah. All right. So I think this is a good time. We're going to put up a slide if our producers would. So I should say, unfortunately, there was not enough time to get the DNA results back for a presentation here, but the family history research was all done with the limited information that I was able to provide. My grandparents emigrated to this country through Ellis Island in New York City. I know some of the history. Their family was in what is now the Ukraine. It was Russia at the time. And this slide, do one of you want to speak to this? Or
Yeah, look, this is a really good example of some of the things you can find on Ancestry. One of the things I will note is in reviewing this information, I realized 5 minutes ago that the ship your grandfather came over on in 1911, I think, was the same ship that my great-great-grandfather emigrated to Ellis Island from the same port of Hamburg about 20 years earlier. So, look, this is the thing that has really powered our core business, the ability to make discoveries about where we come from and either confirm or in some places, and sometimes overturn assumptions we have about who we are and where we've come from. So if you imagine overlaying this experience with a picture of how you fit into a relatedness graph of all the people that have been descendants of this person or ancestors and siblings, it's a very powerful experience.
What was interesting for me here, I knew most of this, and I should say if you were really industrious, this is research that you can do yourself.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So these three names that are listed in sort of the middle are in order my grandfather's children. Sylvia was my aunt. She was the oldest. The middle name, which none of us have been able to quite make out, but which got changed to Moses from my father. He's the middle child. And then David was his younger brother, my uncle. But the birth date from my father is not the birth date that he ever said was his birthday and that we've ever celebrated.
Yeah.
And it's off by about 6 months. Now, was this data that he would have provided to the authorities? Or his father would have provided to the authorities?
So one of the things that, truthfully, one of the wonderful things about Ancestry as a business model is it's really a never-ending journey to try to find the real truth in these historical documents. So think about it. Your grandfather had to remember the right date. He had to communicate that to somebody. That person had to write it down. And then we had to take a picture of it. And sometimes it's illegible. So it's not always a straight line from A to Z. Fortunately, people are never done with this stuff. And so we just keep trying to add content, new experiences and new discoveries powered from this DNA graph to keep people engaged and constantly helping them make discoveries about their ancestry.
So here's a good example, talking about the matching with cousins. We will now create, over time, a network of individuals that are related to you who may have found pictures, other documents that help you clarify. So I think another big part of this is the social experience that we haven't yet fully fleshed out. That's going to be a combination of both the current experience and DNA to allow you to continue to expand on that.
Now, if I were if I had gone to you guys to provide me with this information, and I had these questions, do I have an opportunity to go back to you and say, can you do more research for me here?
Well, we're not in the business of doing research. We are providing content, and we spent hundreds of millions of dollars digitizing these historical records from governments and archives all over the world. So one thing you can do is connect with people, distant cousins, some of whom may be phenomenal genealogists, and you can make real discoveries from, by talking to and communicating with other people in this relatedness graph.
You have a commercial running in which somebody says, I think I have this right, I thought we were Scottish, and it turns out we were German or something like that. Yeah. How does that happen? I mean, how can somebody and families get that so wrong?
Well, first of all, I can tell you that very few people here have a Cherokee ancestor, although probably half the room may believe so. So we all live with these family myths and legends. My name is Timothy Patrick Sullivan, but really I'm only a third Irish. And I always knew that, you know, my mom's family came from Germany and Eastern Europe, but somehow my own identity, until I really began to parse it and understand it, my own self-identity was very Irish. So it's not uncommon for families to get things wrong, or for individuals not to really think through, you know, sort of the genetic makeup of the many people that have contributed to.
And so, had the DNA sample from me been ready, what you would have provided me with was sort of like a pie chart of my various ethnic mix, or
Yeah.
what would that have looked like?
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think one of the things that people think about is that it's only geography, and it really isn't, right? It's a genetic ethnicity. It's those individuals that, you know, your ancestors were part of. So it could be geography, it could be religion, it could be, you know, language, and so for you, for example, it could have been if there was part Jewish or a geography, and so we actually try to give you a mix, and we really let the data sort of tell us what these regions should be, and that's what we provide the consumer. And I think in the future, you know, coming out later this year and certainly into 17, amazing new products that are coming out that are giving us greater and greater resolution for consumers to understand where their ancestors came from.
And so I would have gotten that pie chart, but then you would have also provided me, or you will provide me with
A list of everyone.
a list of names
Absolutely.
of people who I'm, or not names, identifying people, right, that I can contact
A very,
anonymously.
you know, second,
Right,
third, fourth
right,
cousins,
right,
et cetera.
right,
Yes.
right. What keeps you guys up at night? Obviously, the business is doing well, but I'm really curious about what good executives are always worried in the back of their minds, right?
Yeah. So, look, I mean, I think our biggest risks and the things we're focused on constantly are just executional. We're not, and the core business does not have a super robust competitive set. We really are, you know, sort of the center of gravity of the space. We clearly have a competitor in 23andMe, but, you know, we're really focused on identity as our value prop, so it's not a direct competitor. So, you know, we have a vision for where we want to take the business, and we're operating now at a much larger scale than we were, you know, 3-4 years ago. So we're trying to transform the company. We just took a major investment from Silver Lake, and they're bringing, you know, tremendous value as a new partner to help a company scale and build the technology infrastructure. That's really the stuff I think I don't want to say worried about, but determined to get right to maintain our growth and position the company for, you know, sort of faster and faster innovation going forward.
Well, we have to stop there. Thank you guys very much. Please thank these guys.
Appreciate it.
And thanks for your attention.